I almost dropped my handbag when I saw the silver key lying in the center of their dining table. It was old, beautifully carved, and tied with a faded blue ribbon that had become almost gray with age. I had not seen that key since the day my father locked his study for the final time. My heart became strangely heavy because I knew there was only one key like it, and somehow it had found its way into a house where it should never have existed. Nobody noticed that I had stopped walking. Clara smiled brightly as she came toward me and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. She looked happier than I had seen her in many years, and I refused to let my surprise take that happiness away. Julian followed her with the same warm smile he had worn from the first day we met, completely unaware that one small object had already changed the entire evening for me. Nathan Mercer greeted me with confidence that seemed effortless. His wife, Eleanor, welcomed me with gentle kindness before leading everyone into the dining room. Their home was elegant without feeling extravagant. Every piece of furniture had been carefully chosen, and every painting appeared to tell its own quiet story. Yet my eyes continued returning to the old silver key resting beside a crystal bowl in the middle of the table. It was impossible to ignore. Some objects carry more than practical value. They also carry memories, promises, and unanswered questions. A family photograph can remind people of forgotten happiness, while an old letter can reopen emotions that seemed buried for many years. That is why historians, collectors, and ordinary families often protect meaningful objects with extraordinary care. Sometimes a single object tells a more honest story than 100 conversations. My name is Evelyn Ashford, and I have spent nearly 26 years working inside the historical archive of our town's public library. Most visitors believe my work begins and ends with old books, dusty shelves, and forgotten newspapers. They rarely realize that an archive is built to protect evidence rather than memories. Memories become softer with time, but evidence quietly waits for someone willing to examine it carefully. That belief shaped my entire life. I never became wealthy. I never owned a large business or inherited expensive property after my parents passed away. My small brick house near the river had been purchased through years of careful saving, and my old blue sedan carried more scratches than polished paint. I never considered those things a failure because I measured success differently. Peace, honesty, and meaningful work had always seemed more valuable than appearances. Clara often teased me about living such a predictable life. She loved busy cities, modern cafes, and spontaneous weekend trips. She believed every new place offered another opportunity to discover something exciting, while I found quiet satisfaction inside familiar routines. Even though we were different in many ways, our relationship remained close because we respected each other's choices instead of trying to change them. About 18 months earlier, she introduced me to Julian Mercer. He arrived carrying flowers for me instead of chocolates, explaining that flowers lasted longer inside pleasant memories than sweets ever could. That small decision impressed me because it felt thoughtful rather than rehearsed. During dinner, he asked questions about restoration work, handwritten manuscripts, and local history instead of speaking endlessly about his own achievements. I left that evening believing my daughter had found someone with genuine kindness. Over time, that opinion became stronger. Julian visited regularly, repaired loose fence panels after a heavy storm, and never left without asking whether I needed help carrying boxes from the library archive. He listened carefully whenever I described unusual discoveries among old records, even though many younger people considered such stories boring. His curiosity felt sincere, and sincere curiosity often reveals quiet intelligence. Curiosity is one of the most valuable habits anyone can develop while learning a language or understanding people. Curious individuals notice details that others ignore because they continue asking simple questions instead of accepting easy answers. The difference between assumption and understanding often begins with one additional question. That habit has protected me from many mistakes throughout my life. 3 months before that dinner, Clara arrived at my house carrying wonderful news. Julian had proposed during a visit to an old botanical garden outside the city. She looked happier than I had ever seen her, and I celebrated with genuine excitement because I believed she had chosen someone worthy of her trust. When she invited me to meet Julian's parents, I accepted immediately without the smallest hesitation. Looking back now, I often wonder whether life quietly recognized the truth before I did. The drive to the Mercer estate took almost 40 minutes. As I followed the winding country road, dark clouds slowly gathered above the distant hills. Although the weather forecast had promised clear skies until midnight, the air felt unusually still, and even the birds seemed quieter than normal. I have never believed that storms predict human events, yet that evening carried a silence I could not explain. Nathan welcomed me warmly the moment I arrived. His handshake was confident without becoming aggressive, while Eleanor immediately offered tea before introducing me to several relatives who had already gathered for dinner. Everyone appeared relaxed and cheerful. Laughter moved naturally through the house, and soft piano music played somewhere beyond the hallway. It looked exactly like the kind of evening every mother hopes her daughter will enjoy before her wedding. Then I saw the key. It rested on the table as though it belonged there. I recognized the tiny crack near the handle, the faded ribbon tied around its neck, and the small letter A engraved beneath the decorative pattern. My father had carved that letter himself when I was only 12 years old, because he worried that one day someone might mistake the key for another. There had never been another. He kept it inside a locked wooden box that remained hidden in his study for decades. After his funeral, the box was empty. The police believed someone had entered the house during the confusion surrounding the funeral. Nothing else had been stolen, so the investigation ended quickly. Friends encouraged me to forget the missing key because it appeared worthless. I accepted that advice even though something inside me never stopped wondering why anyone would steal an ordinary key instead of valuable jewelry. Nathan noticed me looking toward the center of the table. His smile became almost impossible to read. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he asked. I looked at him calmly. "It certainly has an interesting history." For the first time since I arrived, the room became completely silent. Nathan held my eyes for several long seconds before answering. "I'm glad you still remember it." At that moment, I realized I had not been invited to dinner simply because my daughter was getting married. I had been invited because someone wanted to know exactly how much of the past I had forgotten. Before I share the rest of story, I need to know, where are you listening from? I would love to hear from you. Nathan's words remained in the air long after he finished speaking. The cheerful conversations disappeared almost immediately, and even the soft piano music seemed strangely distant. Clara looked from my face to Nathan's, searching for an explanation that neither of us was ready to give. Julian's smile slowly faded, because he understood that something far more important than an ordinary family dinner had just begun. I looked once more at the silver key resting on the table. "I remember it," I said calmly. "What I do not remember is how it found its way into your house." Nathan did not answer immediately. Instead, he invited everyone to take their seats for dinner, as though nothing unusual had happened. His calm behavior surprised me, because most people become nervous when an unexpected truth enters the conversation. Nathan seemed prepared for this moment, and that realization made me even more careful. The first course arrived, but very little was said. Clara tried to restart the conversation by asking Eleanor about the family garden, while Julian spoke about the old apple trees surrounding the property. Their voices sounded natural, yet both of them kept looking toward Nathan and me. They could feel the quiet tension growing between us, even though they still had no idea where it had begun. Patience often reveals more than hurried questions. When people feel uncomfortable, they frequently explain things before anyone asks them to do so. A careful listener understands that silence can become more powerful than interruption, because silence allows hidden thoughts to rise naturally. That lesson had served me well inside the archive, where forgotten details often appeared only after long hours of careful observation. Nathan finally placed his fork beside his plate. "My father believed that key belonged to our family," he said. I listened without changing my expression. "He spent many years searching for it after your grandfather closed the Ashford estate." The words sounded confident. The facts did not. "My grandfather died before I was born," I replied quietly. "He never owned the Ashford estate. My father inherited it from his aunt almost 20 years later." Nathan looked surprised for the first time. It lasted only a second, but I noticed it. People who tell the truth rarely become confused by dates. However, people repeating someone else's version of history sometimes discover small differences they never expected. A single incorrect detail may appear harmless, yet it often encourages thoughtful people to ask better questions. Careful questions lead to stronger understanding because they separate facts from assumptions. Julian leaned forward with genuine concern. "Dad, what is she talking about?" Nathan slowly turned toward him. "There were disagreements between our families many years ago." I gently shook my head. "There were misunderstandings," I corrected. "Those are not always the same thing." Julian looked more confused than before. Clara quietly reached for my hand beneath the table. I gave her a reassuring smile, because none of this was her fault. Dinner continued, although nobody seemed interested in the food anymore. Eleanor attempted to change the subject several times, but every conversation eventually returned to the silver key waiting silently between us. It had become the true guest at the table, carrying decades of unanswered questions inside a simple piece of metal. Nathan reached into a nearby cabinet and removed a faded leather journal. "I suppose there is no reason to hide this anymore," he said. He carefully placed the journal beside the key. "My father left this before he died." The cover showed years of careful use, and several pages had been repaired with old transparent tape. Nathan opened it slowly before turning the book toward me. Inside was a hand-drawn map. I recognized it immediately. It showed the Ashford estate exactly as it had looked before my father sold the land many years earlier. A small red circle marked one particular room, my father's private study. Nathan watched my reaction carefully. "My father believed something valuable was hidden there," he explained. "The key was supposed to open it." For a brief moment, I understood everything. Not completely, but enough. The missing key had never been important by itself. Someone believed it unlocked something else. History becomes dangerous when people chase only half of the truth. One forgotten letter may create unnecessary suspicion, while one missing document may encourage people to invent their own explanations. That is why responsible researchers continue searching until every important piece fits naturally into the larger picture. True understanding rarely appears after the first discovery, because every answer usually creates another question. I looked at the journal once again. My father never locked that study. Nathan frowned. What do you mean? There was no secret room. Silence returned. The key opened only one thing. What? Julian asked. My father's writing cabinet. Nathan stared at me. That cannot be true. It is. He searched for years. I know. You knew? I nodded slowly. My father told me everything during the final week of his life. Nathan looked as though the floor beneath him had suddenly become uncertain. What was inside the cabinet? Eleanor asked quietly. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I remembered that final conversation with my father. He had been weak, but his mind remained perfectly clear. He told me that if anyone ever came looking for the silver key, I should listen carefully before saying too much. He believed that people searching for the key were actually searching for something they imagined, rather than something that truly existed. At the time, I thought illness had made him suspicious. Now I realized he had been protecting someone. Not himself, someone else. Nathan slowly leaned forward. Evelyn, he said carefully, what was inside that cabinet? I met his eyes without hesitation. Letters. His expression remained unchanged. Only letters? And one sealed envelope. Nathan's breathing became noticeably slower. What happened to it? I still have it. Nobody spoke. Julian looked at his father with growing concern. Dad, why does that matter? Nathan never answered him. His attention remained fixed on me. The envelope, he said quietly. Have you ever opened it? I shook my head. My father told me never to open it unless someone came looking for the silver key. Nathan closed his eyes. For the first time that evening, the confidence disappeared from his face. When he looked at me again, his voice sounded completely different. Then everything my father believed may have been wrong. I gently rested my hand on the old envelope-shaped mark pressed into the journal's final page. No, I said softly. Everything your father believed depended on what was inside an envelope that neither of us has ever read. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything we had shared that evening. Then Nathan whispered 7 words that changed the entire direction of the story. My father wasn't searching for money, Evelyn. Nathan's quiet confession settled over the table like a heavy shadow. Nobody reached for another bite of food because the dinner had become something entirely different. Clara looked at me with worried eyes, while Julian sat perfectly still, waiting for someone to explain what his father truly meant. The silver key remained between us, no longer looking like an ordinary object, but like the final piece of a story that had remained unfinished for decades. I looked at Nathan calmly. If your father was not searching for money, then what was he searching for? Nathan rested both hands on the table before answering. He believed your father carried the truth about my grandfather's death. The words surprised everyone. Even I needed a few moments to understand them. My grandfather died in a warehouse fire, Nathan continued. Our family was told that poor business decisions ruined everything before the fire happened. My father believed your father knew what really caused that tragedy. I slowly leaned back in my chair. My father never mentioned a fire. He rarely spoke to anyone after those years, Nathan replied. My father believed silence meant guilt. I gently shook my head. Silence can also mean grief. People often misunderstand silence because they expect every honest person to defend themselves immediately. However, pain affects people differently. Some explain every detail, while others become quiet because speaking forces them to relive painful memories. Learning to understand different emotional responses helps us become better listeners and more thoughtful communicators. Julian looked toward his father. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Nathan sighed deeply. "Because I never had proof. You still brought Mom here expecting answers. I brought her because I believed she might know something I never did." I reached into my handbag once more. This time I removed a small sealed envelope. The paper had turned slightly yellow with age, but my father's handwriting remained perfectly clear across the front. "Only open if someone returns for the silver key." Nathan stared at the writing without speaking. "My father asked me to protect this," I said quietly. "For almost 30 years, I believed nobody would ever come looking for it." Clara gently touched my arm. "You never told me. I hoped I would never need to." I carefully broke the old seal. Inside rested a folded letter and one black and white photograph. The photograph showed two young men standing outside an unfinished warehouse. One was my father. The other was Nathan's father. They were smiling. There was no anger between them, no distance, no sign of enemies. Nathan slowly picked up the photograph. "I've never seen this before." I unfolded the letter and began reading aloud. "My dear friend Thomas, if anything ever happens to me, I fear our families will remember only the mistakes and never the truth. The warehouse fire was an accident caused by damaged electrical wiring. We both warned the owners several times, but nobody listened because replacing the system cost too much money. If people search for someone to blame after we are gone, do not let them blame each other. We lost enough already." The room became completely silent. I continued reading. "I have locked these letters away because anger often grows faster than truth. Perhaps one day our children will be wiser than we were. If that day comes, let them inherit honesty instead of suspicion." I lowered the letter. Nobody spoke for several long moments. Nathan quietly covered his eyes. "My father never read this." "No," I replied gently. "He spent his life searching for a key instead of searching for the truth. Sometimes people spend years chasing answers that have already been written down somewhere. They continue believing old assumptions because nobody encourages them to ask one final question. Knowledge becomes meaningful only when we are willing to replace comfortable beliefs with verified facts. That lesson applies to history, relationships, and everyday life." Julian slowly stood from his chair. "So my grandfather blamed the wrong family." Nathan nodded. "I believe he did." "And you inherited that belief." "Yes." Julian looked at me. "And I almost inherited it too." I smiled softly. "But you stopped long enough to listen." He lowered his eyes. I was ready to believe whichever story sounded stronger. That happens more often than people realize. Eleanor quietly wiped away a tear. "We wasted so many years." "We cannot recover those years," I answered. "But we can decide what we do with tomorrow." Nathan carefully folded the letter before placing it back inside the envelope. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "This evening was never about forgiveness," I replied. "It was about truth." He slowly picked up the silver key. "For 30 years, I believed this key opened a hidden fortune." I looked at him with quiet understanding. "It opened something far more valuable." He nodded. "It opened the truth." A few days later, Nathan, Julian, Clara, and I visited the town museum together. The curator accepted the letter, the photograph, and the silver key into the historical collection so future generations would understand the complete story instead of only one family's version. The display did not celebrate wealth or success. It honored honesty, friendship, and the courage to correct a mistake before another generation inherited it. Before leaving, Julian stopped beside the new display and quietly read the final line from my father's letter one more time. He smiled before turning toward me. I thought a legacy was something people left behind. It is, I answered. But now I understand something else. What is that? We also choose which legacy we carry forward. I looked once more at the silver key resting safely behind the museum glass. For many years, I believed it had protected a secret. In the end, it had protected a choice. Every family inherits stories, but not every story deserves to remain unchanged. Some stories grow stronger when supported by evidence, while others quietly disappear when truth finally steps into the light. The greatest legacy we can leave behind is not wealth, property, or old family treasures. It is the courage to question what we inherit, the wisdom to seek the complete truth, and the kindness to build a better story for those who come after us. If you liked this story, please like, comment, and share. More simple and emotional stories are coming soon.